My name is Iris, and I'm 62 years old. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other ordinary day in my quiet little life. I had just finished a phone call with my son Derek when I heard something that shattered my world completely. He forgot to hang up. Through the receiver, I heard him laugh and say to his wife, "He is too blind to notice." My heart stopped. I quietly placed the phone down and drove straight to the bank. A month later, everything changed. Before I tell you what I discovered and what I did about it, I want to know where you are joining me from today. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. What you are about to hear is something I never thought would happen in my own family. Stay with me until the end because what happened a month later changed everything. Let me take you back to a time when I still believed my family was perfect. I need you to understand what my life looked like before that terrible phone call so you can truly grasp how far we fell. I live in Sacramento, California. It is a beautiful city with tree-lined streets and warm summers. My husband Harold and I moved here 40 years ago when we were young and full of dreams. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, raised our son, and built what I thought was a good life. Harold is 65 years old now. He retired from the Pacific Gas and Electric Company after 40 years of dedicated service. He started as a lineman climbing poles in rain and shine and worked his way up to a supervisor position. Every single day of those 40 years, he woke up at 5 in the morning without complaint. He provided for our family. He was the kind of man who believed that hard work and honesty would always be rewarded. That was one of the things I loved most about him. Harold trusts people. He sees the good in everyone, sometimes to a fault. When our neighbor needed help fixing his fence, Harold was there. When the church needed volunteers, Harold signed up. He never questioned anyone's motives. He simply believed that people were fundamentally good. I spent 30 years working as a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I saw the best and worst of humanity in those halls. Babies being born, people taking their last breaths, families coming together and falling apart. I like to think it made me more observant, more cautious about trusting blindly. But even I never saw what was coming from within my own family. Together, Harold and I had one child, our son Derek. He was our miracle baby born after 3 miscarriages and years of trying. From the moment he came into this world screaming and red-faced, he became the center of our universe. Derek is 38 years old now. He married a woman named Natalie 8 years ago and they have 2 children together. Sophie is 7, a quiet girl with her grandmother's eyes. Marcus is 5, always running and laughing. Those grandchildren are the light of my life. Every time they visit, the house feels alive again. When Derek was growing up, we gave him everything we could. Not material things necessarily, though we made sure he never went without. We gave him our time, our attention, our love. Harold coached his little league team. I helped with every school project. We saved for years to send him to a good college. Derek graduated with a degree in business administration. He told us he was going to be a real estate developer, that he had big plans and bigger dreams. Harold beamed with pride. "My son, the businessman," he would say to anyone who would listen. After college, Derek started his own real estate company. At least that is what he told us. He talked about deals and investments and partnerships. He used words like portfolio and leverage and market positioning. Harold and I did not understand most of it, but we trusted him. He was our son. Why would he lie? Now let me tell you about our finances, because this is important for understanding what happened later. Harold and I were never rich, but we were responsible. We paid off our house 10 years ago. We put money into retirement accounts every month for decades. By the time Harold retired, we had saved about $450,000. It was our safety net, our security for old age, our legacy for our grandchildren. Harold handled all the finances. He balanced the checkbook, paid the bills, managed our investments. I trusted him completely with this. He had done it well for 40 years. Why would I question it now? Looking back, I realized this was a mistake. Not because Harold was dishonest, he was always honest, but because when it came to Derek, Harold had a blind spot the size of Texas, and I did not see it until it was almost too late. There were small signs early on, things I noticed, but chose to ignore because questioning them felt disloyal. Derek rarely visited us. He lived only 40 minutes away, but we might see him once a month if we were lucky. When he did come, he always seemed rushed, checking his phone, looking at his watch. He would stay for an hour, sometimes less, and then make excuses about meetings or appointments. The grandchildren were growing up without really knowing us. Sophie was shy around me, which broke my heart. Marcus barely recognized our house. They were polite children, well behaved, but distant. Like we were strangers they had to be nice to. And then there was Natalie. Derek's wife barely spoke to me. She would sit in our living room scrolling through her phone while Derek talked to Harold about business. She never offered to help in the kitchen. She never asked about my day. I told myself she was just introverted, just different from me. But something about her cold silence always made me uneasy. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner about 2 years ago. Derek and Natalie arrived late. The children were hungry and cranky. Natalie looked around our modest home with something that might have been disdain. I caught her whispering something to Derek, and he laughed. I asked what was funny. Derek said, "Nothing, Mom, just an inside joke." But the look that passed between them made my stomach turn. I pushed the feeling down and served the turkey. That is what mothers do. We ignore the warning signs because the alternative is too painful to consider. Harold, bless his heart, never noticed any of this. To him, Derek was still the little boy who wanted to be carried on his shoulders. Derek was his pride, his legacy, his proof that he had done something right in this world. "Everything I do is for my son," Harold used to say. I just never realized how literally Derek was taking that statement. The trouble started about 6 months before the phone call that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon in April. Harold and I had just come back from church. The phone rang and Harold answered. I could hear Derek's voice through the receiver, animated and excited. Harold's face lit up the way it always did when Derek called. He walked into the other room for privacy, but I could still hear bits and pieces. An investment opportunity. Guaranteed returns. Needed by Wednesday. When Harold came back into the kitchen, he looked happy. He told me that Derek had a chance to invest in a major real estate development, some condominiums being built downtown. Derek needed $100,000 as his share of the investment. I nearly dropped the dish I was drying. $100,000, I repeated. Harold, that is almost a quarter of our savings. Harold waved his hand dismissively. It is an investment, Iris. Derek knows what he is doing. He said, we could triple our money in 2 years. I wanted to argue. Everything in my nurse's brain told me this was wrong. You do not hand over that kind of money based on a phone call. You ask questions. You see paperwork. You verify. But Harold was already on the computer, logging into our bank account. And the look in his eyes was so hopeful, so proud of his son, that I could not bring myself to crush it. He is a businessman, Iris, Harold said. We have to trust him. Against my better judgment, I stayed silent. Harold transferred the money that same day. 3 months later, Derek called again. This time his voice was stressed. He explained that his business partner had backed out of the project unexpectedly. Derek needed another $75,000 to cover the shortfall, or he would lose everything he had already invested, including our $100,000. I was in the room when Derek made this request. I watched Harold's face fall, then recover, then harden with determination. I will take care of it, son, Harold said. Do not worry. After he hung up, I confronted him. Harold, we cannot keep giving him money like this. Something is wrong. Harold looked at me with something close to anger. In 40 years of marriage, I had rarely seen that expression directed at me. He is our son, Iris. His business is in trouble. What kind of parents would we be if we did not help? But we have not seen any paperwork, no contracts, no proof that this investment even exists. Harold shook his head. "You are overthinking this. Derek would never lie to us." He transferred another $75,000 the next morning. After that, I started paying closer attention to our finances. What I found made me sick. Harold had given Derek even more money than I knew about. Small amounts over the years, 5,000 here, 10,000. They're always for business expenses or temporary cash flow problems. When I added it all up, my hands were shaking. In the past 3 years alone, Harold had given Derek over $230,000. More than half of our life savings had vanished into our son's supposedly thriving business. I confronted Harold about this. We had our first real fight in years. He accused me of not trusting our son. I accused him of being blind. He said I was jealous of his relationship with Derek. I said he was being manipulated. In the end, Harold broke down crying. He admitted he was worried. The money should have started coming back by now. Derek kept making excuses. The market was slow, the permits were delayed, the investors were nervous. "But he is still our son," Harold said through his tears. "What else can I do?" I held my husband and felt something cold settle in my chest. I did not know what was really happening yet, but I knew something was very, very wrong. The phone calls continued, but they changed. Derek started calling at odd hours, early in the morning, before I was awake. Late at night, when he knew I would be in bed. He always asked to speak to Harold, and Harold always took the calls in another room. One morning I woke up early with a headache. I walked downstairs to get some aspirin and heard Harold's voice in the study. He was on the phone with Derek. "I understand, son." "Yes. No, your mother does not need to know the details. I will handle it." I stood frozen in the hallway listening. "How much this time?" "Okay, I will see what I can do." When Harold emerged from the study, he looked startled to see me standing there. "Who was that?" I asked, though I already knew. "Just Derek, business stuff. You know how it is." I looked at my husband of 40 years, the man I had trusted with my life, and I saw a stranger keeping secrets from me. What did he want, Harold? Harold hesitated. Then he said he just needed some advice, that is all. But I saw his hands trembling. I saw the way he avoided my eyes, and I knew he was lying. Something inside me shifted that morning. I stopped being the trusting wife who let her husband handle everything. I started watching, waiting, looking for proof of what I already suspected in my gut. I began checking the mail before Harold could get to it. That is how I found the bank statement. He had tried to hide. It was tucked inside a catalog, as if he had been trying to smuggle it into the house without me seeing. I pulled it out and scanned the numbers. My blood ran cold. The statement showed massive withdrawals from our savings account, far more than the amounts Harold had told me about. According to this statement, we had given Derek $235,000 in the past year alone. We had less than $200,000 left. Nearly 60% of our life savings was gone. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at that statement for a long time. I thought about Harold climbing those telephone poles for 40 years. I thought about my own aching feet after 12-hour shifts at the hospital. I thought about all the dinners we had not eaten out, all the vacations we had not taken, all the sacrifices we had made to build that nest egg. And I thought about my son, who apparently saw us as nothing more than an ATM machine. When Harold came home that afternoon, I showed him the statement. This time, I did not back down when he tried to explain. I demanded answers. Harold finally admitted the truth. Derek had been calling constantly, always, with new emergencies, new expenses, new reasons why he needed money immediately. Harold had been giving it to him without question, without documentation, without telling me. "Why did you hide this from me?" I asked. Harold hung his head. "Because I knew you would try to stop me, and I could not let my son fail." "But Harold, where is all this money going? Have you seen any returns, any proof that these investments are real?" Harold did not answer. He did not have to. The silence told me everything. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My husband slept beside me, but I felt completely alone. I was married to a man who had been deceived by his own son, and I had no idea how to fix it. The day that changed everything was a Tuesday in October. The leaves were just starting to turn. There was a crispness in the air that usually makes me feel early. Instead, I felt weighed down by a dread I could not name. Harold had a doctor's appointment that morning. Just a routine checkup, nothing serious. He left around 9, promising to be back by lunch. I was alone in the house trying to distract myself with housework. The kitchen needed cleaning. The laundry needed folding. Normal tasks for a normal day. Then the phone rang. I picked up the receiver. It was Derek. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was casual, friendly. The voice of a dutiful son. "Hello, Derek, how are you?" "Good, good. Busy with work, you know how it is." "Hey, is Dad around?" "No, he's at the doctor. Just a checkup." "Oh, okay." Derek sounded slightly annoyed. "When will he be back?" "Around noon, I think. Is everything all right?" "Yeah, fine. Just some business stuff I need to discuss with him. Can you tell him to call me when he gets back? It is important." "Of course." There was a pause. Then Derek said, "Thanks, Mom. Talk to you later." "Goodbye, Derek." I waited to hear the click of him hanging up. But it never came. Instead, I heard rustling, distant voices. Derek had not ended the call. I should have hung up. That would have been the polite thing to do, the respectful thing. But something made me hold that receiver to my ear. Call it mother's intuition. Call it the suspicion that had been building for months. Whatever it was, I stayed on the line. And what I heard next destroyed the last illusion I had about my son. Derek's voice came through distant but clear. He was talking to someone. Natalie, I assumed. That was just Mom. Dad is at the doctor. Natalie's voice muffled. "Did you ask about the money?" Derek laughed. It was a cold sound, nothing like the warm chuckle I remembered from his childhood. "Do not worry. He will give us more. He always does." There was a pause. Then Derek said the words that I will never forget as long as I live. "He is too blind to see it. The old man thinks I am some kind of business genius." Natalie laughed too. They were laughing at Harold, at my husband, at the man who had sacrificed everything for his son. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. But there was more. Derek kept talking. "I just need to keep playing the good son a little longer. Once I get power of attorney, we will have access to everything." Power of attorney. Those words hit me like a physical blow. "How much more do you think we can get?" Natalie asked. "There is still about 200,000 in their savings. And do not forget about the house. That place is worth at least 400,000. "Not bad for doing nothing?" Natalie said. Derek snorted. "It's clonely. And the best part is they are so desperate to believe I'm successful that they do not ask questions. Mom is suspicious sometimes, but Dad shuts her down. He wants to believe his son is a winner." What about when they find out? They will not. And even if they do, what are they going to do? Sue their own son? They are too old to fight. By the time they figure it out, we will have everything we need. More laughter. Cruel, ugly laughter at the expense of two people who had given everything for this ungrateful child. I had heard enough. Very quietly, very carefully, I placed the receiver back on the hook. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and let the tears fall. But they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of awakening. For months I had suspected something was wrong. For months I had watched Harold give and give while Derek took and took. But I had never imagined the depth of the betrayal. I had never dreamed that my own son would speak about his father with such contempt. "He is too blind to see it." Those words echoed in my head, and I realized something important. Harold might be blind, but I was not. I sat at that table for maybe 15 minutes. I let myself feel the full weight of what I had learned. The grief, the anger, the shame of having raised a son who could do this to his own parents. Then I wiped my eyes, stood up, and made a decision. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to let my son rob us of everything we had worked for. And I was not going to wait until it was too late. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. I walked out the front door. And I drove straight to First National Bank. The bank was quiet when I arrived. a few customers at the teller windows, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of paper and ink that all banks seem to have. I asked to speak with the manager. The young woman at the front desk looked at me with concern. I must have looked upset. My hands were still shaking. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked. "I need to speak with someone about my accounts. It is urgent." She led me to an office in the back. The manager was a man named George Patterson. I had known him for years. He and his wife were members of our church. "Iris," he said, standing to greet me. "What a nice surprise. What can I do for you?" I sat down across from his desk and took a deep breath. "George, I need to see all the transaction history for our savings account. Every withdrawal, every transfer. Going back at least 3 years." George's friendly expression faltered slightly. He could tell this was not a social visit. "Of course," he said. "Let me pull that up." He typed on his computer for a few minutes. Then he printed several pages and handed them to me. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. The account had been hemorrhaging money for years. Large withdrawals, always in round numbers. 100,000, 75,000, 50,000, 25,000. The amounts varied, but the pattern was clear. "George," I said slowly, "I see here that my son Derek has been listed as an authorized user on this account." George nodded. "Yes, your husband added him about 3 years ago. Said it was for convenience in case anything happened." In case anything happened. Harold had given Derek direct access to our life savings. "I need you to remove him immediately." George looked uncomfortable. "I can do that, but I will need your husband's signature as well, since he is the primary account holder." I had expected this. In our generation, husbands often handle the finances. Women like me were secondary on our own accounts. What if I told you that my son has been taking money without our knowledge? That he is planning to take more? George's face grew serious. "Iris, are you saying there has been fraud?" I hesitated. Calling my own son a criminal was not easy. But then I remembered his laughter, his contempt, his plans to get power of attorney and take everything. "I'm saying that I need to protect my family's finances. What are my options?" George was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have a joint account with your husband. Both of you have equal rights to the funds. You could transfer a portion to a new account in your name only. That way, even if Derek tries to access the joint account, he cannot touch everything." It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. "Do it," I said. "Transfer 100,000 to a new account. Just my name." George hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Iris? This is a significant amount." I looked him in the eye. "George, my son is trying to steal from his own parents. I'm not going to sit by and let it happen. I have worked too hard and too long to lose everything now." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He nodded and began the paperwork. An hour later, I walked out of that bank with a new account in my name and a determination I had not felt in years. But I knew this was just the beginning. I needed professional help to protect us fully. The next day, I visited a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Yamamoto. She was recommended by a friend from my old nursing days. Patricia specialized in elder law and estate planning. Exactly what I needed. I told her everything. The money Derek had taken, the phone call I overheard, his plans for power of attorney. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Mrs. Wallace, I have to be honest with you. What your son is doing is unfortunately more common than people realize. It is called financial elder abuse." Financial elder abuse. The words made me sick. I was not elderly. I was only 62. But in the eyes of the law, I was a potential victim. Patricia continued, "The good news is that your husband has not signed any power of attorney documents yet. That means Derek does not have legal control over your assets. But he has access to our bank account, which you have already begun addressing." That was smart. She smiled slightly. "The next step is to revoke Derek's authorization entirely. For that, you will need your husband on board. That was the part I dreaded. Harold still did not know what I had heard on the phone. He still believed Derek was struggling, but honest. Telling him the truth would break his heart. But I had no choice. Patricia helped me prepare. She drafted documents to revoke Derek's bank access. She updated our wills to remove Derek as beneficiary. She established a trust for our grandchildren that Derek could not touch. These grandchildren are innocent, Patricia said. They should not be punished for their father's actions. I agreed completely. Sophie and Marcus had done nothing wrong. Whatever happened between us and Derek, I wanted those children to have something from their grandparents someday. With all the legal groundwork laid, I knew it was time for the hardest conversation of my life. That evening after dinner, I sat Harold down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten thousands of meals, where Derek had done his homework as a child, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary days. Harold, I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond. Something in my tone must have alarmed him. His face went pale. I told him about the phone call. I repeated every word Derek had said exactly as I remembered it. I watched my husband's expression change from confusion to disbelief to devastation. He is too blind to see it, I quoted. The old man thinks I'm some business genius. Harold looked like I had stabbed him. No, he whispered. Derek would not. He could not. I pulled out the bank statements, the ones showing the massive withdrawals, the ones showing Derek's authorization. He already has Harold. For years. Harold stared at those papers. I watched 40 years of fatherly pride crumble into dust. And then Harold did something I had never seen in our entire marriage. He put his head down on the table and sobbed like a child. I moved to sit beside him. I put my arms around him. I let him cry. I just wanted to be a good father, he kept saying. I just wanted to help him. I know, I said. You are a good father. This is not your fault. Derek made his choices. We stayed like that for a long time. Two old people holding each other in a kitchen that suddenly felt very empty. But when Harold finally lifted his head, I saw something new in his eyes. Not just grief, determination. What do we do now? He asked. Now, I said, we fight back. Together, Harold and I implemented a plan. We did not confront Derek directly. Not yet. First, we needed more evidence, more proof of what he had done and what he was planning. Harold started recording his phone calls with Derek. It was painful for him. Every conversation was a reminder of the son he thought he had versus the son he actually raised. But Harold pushed through because he understood what was at stake. The recordings were damning. In one call, Derek demanded $50,000 for an emergency. When Harold said he needed to think about it, Derek's tone turned threatening. Come on, Dad, you know I am good for it. Do not make me beg. It is a lot of money, son. You have more. I know you do. Just transfer it and stop making a big deal out of everything. Gone was the respectful son. In his place was a bully who felt entitled to his parents' money. In another call, Derek complained about Natalie's expensive taste and how hard it was to keep up appearances. The guys at the club expect a certain lifestyle, he said. I cannot show up driving some 10-year-old car. Harold listened to these calls with growing horror. The son he remembered, the boy who said please and thank you, who worked hard in school, who promised to make his parents proud, that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger. We also did our own research. Patricia helped us access public records. What we found painted a very different picture than the one Derek had presented. His real estate company had gone bankrupt 2 years ago. He had sold the remaining assets at a loss. There was no thriving business. There were no lucrative investments. Instead, there were debts. Credit card statements showed purchases at casinos, online gambling accounts, expensive dinners, designer clothes. Derek was not a struggling businessman. He was an addict, spending his parents' money to fund his lifestyle. Natalie did not work either. She had quit her job years ago. The two of them were living entirely off what they took from Harold and me. Even their house was a lie. Public records showed it was in foreclosure. The bank was weeks away from taking it back. Everything Derek had told us was fiction. And we had believed every word. Armed with this evidence, we made our final preparations. We formally revoked Derek's access to our bank accounts. We updated our wills to leave everything to Sophie and Marcus through a trust. We named Patricia as the trustee to ensure Derek could never touch a penny meant for his children. And then we waited for the right moment to confront him. 1 month after the phone call that started everything, we were ready. I invited Derek and his family to dinner. I said it was to celebrate Harold's and my wedding anniversary. Derek agreed immediately, probably because he assumed dinner would come with a check. They arrived on a Saturday evening. Derek walked in with his usual confident smile. Natalie trailed behind, barely making eye contact with me. Sophie and Marcus ran to hug their grandfather. Looking at those children, my heart ached. They did not deserve to be caught in the middle of this. But they also did not deserve parents who would steal from their own grandparents. Dinner was tense, though Derek did not seem to notice. He talked about his business as usual, new opportunities, big deals on the horizon, the same lies he had been telling for years. Harold barely spoke. He could not look at his son without seeing the man who had called him blind and old. But he played his part, waiting for the right moment. After we finished eating, I cleared the dishes. The children asked if they could watch television in the other room. I said yes, wanting them away from what was about to happen. Once they were gone, I returned to the dining room table. "Derek," I said, "we need to talk about something important." Derek grinned. "Sure, Mom, what is on your mind?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had saved the recording from that day, the one where Derek forgot to hang up. "I want you to listen to this." I pressed play. Derek's own voice filled the room. "He is too blind to see it. The old man thinks I'm some kind of business genius." The color drained from Derek's face. The recording continued. His plans for power of attorney, his comments about our savings and our house, his cruel laughter with Natalie. By the time it ended, Derek looked like a ghost. Natalie was already on her feet gathering her purse. "That was taken out of context," Derek stammered. "You do not understand." Harold spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 40 years of fatherly love turned to ash. "We heard everything, son." I laid out the bank statements, the records of his failed company, the evidence of his gambling, the foreclosure notice on his house. "We know the truth, Derek, all of it." Derek tried a different approach. He got angry. "You had no right to investigate me. That is a violation of my privacy." I stood my ground. "We had every right. It is our money, our lives. And you were stealing from us." "Stealing?" Derek laughed bitterly. "I'm your son. Everything you have should come to me anyway. What is the big deal if I get it a little early?" I looked at this man. I had raised this stranger wearing my son's face, and I felt something I never thought I would feel for my own child. Pity. "Derek," I said slowly, "you are not entitled to our money. No one is entitled to anything they did not earn. We worked our entire lives for what we have. And you tried to take it with lies and manipulation." Natalie grabbed Derek's arm. "We should go." Derek shook her off. He turned to Harold, desperation in his eyes. "Dad, come on, we can work this out. I made some mistakes, but I'm still your son." Harold looked at Derek for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Yes, you are my son, and I love you. But love does not mean letting you destroy us." Harold stood up slowly, like it took all his strength. "I gave you everything, Derek. My time, my money, my trust. And you spat on all of it. You laughed at me, called me blind, planned to take everything I worked for." Tears were running down Harold's face now. "I owe you nothing, not anymore. I gave you love, and you turned it into a weapon. That ends today." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once in his life, he had nothing to say. Natalie pulled him toward the door. "Come on, Derek, let us just go." They left without another word. Derek did not look back. I stood in the doorway watching them drive away. Harold came to stand beside me. We held hands like we used to do when we were young. Did we do the right thing? Harold asked. I squeezed his hand. We did the only thing we could. The aftermath was painful but necessary. Without access to our money, Derek's carefully constructed life collapsed. The house was foreclosed. The fancy cars were repossessed. The lifestyle he had built on lies came crashing down. Natalie left him within 6 months. She had only been there for the money, and once that dried up, she disappeared. She moved to another state, leaving Derek with the children. Derek hit rock bottom. He had to move into a small apartment. He had to get a real job for the first time in years. He worked at a hardware store earning an honest wage for honest work. Harold took the longest to heal. The betrayal cut him deeper than it cut me. He had built his entire identity around being a good father, and Derek had shattered that image. I convinced Harold to see a therapist. It was not easy. Men of his generation do not talk about their feelings, but Harold needed help processing what had happened, and I could not give him everything he needed on my own. Slowly, Harold began to recover. He started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring young men who needed guidance. It gave him a sense of purpose. It reminded him that he still had something valuable to offer. I could not save my own son, he told me once, but maybe I can help somebody else's. As for me, I found strength I did not know I had. Before that phone call, I had been a passive partner in my own life. I let Harold make the decisions. I trusted without verifying. I kept quiet even when my instincts told me something was wrong. Never again. I took over managing our finances. I joined a support group for people dealing with family estrangement. I even started speaking at community events about financial elder abuse, sharing my story so others could learn from it. We are not too old to fight, I would tell audiences. Age does not make us weak. Fear does. And we have the power to choose courage instead. The response was overwhelming. So many people came up to me afterward with their own stories. Sons and daughters who had taken advantage, grandchildren they were not allowed to see, life savings that had vanished into the hands of people they trusted. I realized that Harold and I were not alone. This epidemic of family betrayal was happening everywhere, hidden behind closed doors and family loyalty. Speaking out became my mission. If my pain could help others protect themselves, then at least something good would come from this nightmare. The hardest part was the grandchildren. Sophie and Marcus were innocent victims of their father's choices. They did not understand why their grandparents had stopped giving money. They did not know about the lies and manipulation. For a while after Derek and Natalie split up, we did not see the children at all. Derek was too angry, too hurt, too proud to let us near them. But eventually necessity won out. Derek needed help with childcare now that he was working full-time. He swallowed his pride and asked if the children could spend weekends with us. I wanted to say no. I wanted to punish him by keeping Sophie and Marcus away. But then I remembered that punishing Derek would only hurt his children. Yes, I told him, bring them anytime. Those weekends became the highlight of our lives. Sophie and Marcus bloomed under our care. We baked cookies together. We read stories. We played in the backyard. We gave them the simple, loving attention that every child deserves. We never spoke badly about their father. Whatever Derek had done to us, he was still their dad. They needed to love him, and we would not take that away. But we also made sure they knew they were loved, that they had grandparents who would always be there for them, that no matter what happened, they had a safe place to land. The trust we had established would ensure they had money for college and beyond. Derek could not touch it. Natalie could not touch it. Someday, when Sophie and Marcus were old enough to understand, we would explain everything. Until then, we just loved them. 3 years have passed since that October afternoon when Derek forgot to hang up the phone. I'm 65 years old now. Harold is 68. We are still in our house, the one we paid off with decades of hard work. We are still together, our marriage stronger, for having survived this trial. Derek has changed. I will not say he has transformed into a wonderful person, because that would be a lie. But he has stopped lying to us. He works his job at the hardware store without complaint. He takes care of his children. He does not ask us for money anymore. Last Christmas, he came to dinner. It was awkward at first. None of us knew what to say. But Sophie and Marcus were so happy to have everyone together that we pushed through the discomfort. At the end of the evening, Derek pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want you to know I am sorry." I looked at my son, not the con artist, not the manipulator, just a middle-aged man who had made terrible choices and was trying to find his way back. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Derek," I said honestly. "Maybe I never will be, but I'm not holding on to anger anymore. It does not serve me." He nodded. I think he understood. We are not close. We may never be close again, but we are civil. We are family. And for now, that is enough. People ask me if I regret what happened, if I wish things had turned out differently. Of course I do. I wish my son had grown up to be honest. I wish Harold and I still had our full savings. I wish we had not lost years of trust and happiness. But I do not regret my actions. I do not regret listening to that phone call even though it broke my heart. I do not regret going to the bank, hiring a lawyer, confronting the truth, because if I had not done those things, we would have lost everything. Derek would have gotten power of attorney. He would have drained our accounts. He might have even taken our house. By acting when I did, I saved our future. Imperfect as it is still ours. The biggest lesson I learned from this experience is about the nature of trust. Trust is not something you give blindly. It is something that must be earned and maintained, even with family, especially with family. Harold trusted Derek because Derek was his son. He could not imagine that his own child would betray him. That trust was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. I trusted Harold to manage our finances because he had always done so. But I should have been more involved. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid attention. Blind trust is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. This does not mean we should go through life suspicious of everyone. It means we should love with open eyes, support with boundaries, give with awareness. We can be generous without being foolish. We can be loving without being blind. The other lesson I learned is about my own strength. For 62 years, I thought of myself as a quiet person, a supporter, someone who stood behind her husband and her family. But when it mattered most, I stepped forward. I took control. I made decisions that protected our future. I discovered that I was not weak. I had simply never been tested. Now I tell other women my age the same thing. You're stronger than you know. You're capable of more than you imagine. Do not let anyone, not your husband, not your children, not society tell you otherwise. We have lived long lives. We have survived hardships. We have wisdom and experience and courage. Never underestimate an old woman who has had enough. As for forgiveness, that is a journey I'm still on. I do not hate Derek. Hate requires too much energy, and I prefer to spend my energy on things that bring me joy. But I have not forgiven him either. Not completely. Some wounds take a long time to heal. Some scars never fully fade. What I have found is something better than forgiveness. I have found peace. I have accepted what happened. I have done everything in my power to protect myself and my family. I have created a good life despite the betrayal. Derek's choices no longer control my happiness. His mistakes no longer define my days. I have taken back my power, and I will never give it away again. That, I think, is the truest form of victory. If you're watching this and something in my story sounds familiar, I want you to know that you are not alone. Financial abuse by family members is more common than anyone wants to admit. It happens to smart people, to careful people, to loving people. It is not your fault, but you have the power to stop it. Go to your bank, talk to a lawyer, protect your assets. Do not wait for things to get better on their own, because they will not. And most importantly, trust yourself. That voice in your head that says something is wrong, listen to it. That instinct that tells you to investigate, follow it. That courage that seems impossible, find it. You are not too old. You are not too weak. You are not too anything. You are exactly what you need to be. And you can do this. That Tuesday afternoon, when I heard my son laugh and call his father blind, something in me woke up. I realized that being a good parent does not mean being a victim. I realized that protecting myself was not selfish, it was necessary. I quietly hung up the phone. I drove to the bank. And I changed the course of our lives. 1 month later, we confronted the truth. 3 years later, we have found peace. Whatever your situation is, it is not too late. The phone is still in your hand. The bank is still open. The lawyer is waiting for your call. The only question is, what will you do next? I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to protect yourself? Your stories matter, and sharing them might help someone else who is going through the same thing. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and share it with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. And remember, no matter what life throws at you, you have the strength to face it. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. May you find the courage to protect what is yours and the peace that comes from knowing you did everything you could. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.